With Bartman meets Radioactive Man, we have now officially concluded the busiest era for Simpsons video games. There were 9 original Simpsons games released in 1991 and 1992. So many games came out in such a short time that it might seem strange that the next game we're looking at released in 1994, skipping 1993 entirely. So what happened in 1993 to cause such a drop-off in new games? Did Acclaim decide to stop milking the franchise so aggressively? Of course that's not the case, but to properly explain what happened, we need to look at the individual ports of each Simpsons games from the time. Bart vs. the Space Mutants released in February 1991 on the NES, but the ports for other systems like the Amiga and Commodore 64 were released later in 1991, and the Sega ports released in 1992. When splitting up the releases into their individual versions and ports, you can see that there were 10 games released in 1991. Going to 1992, this increases to 11 different games coming out, with 5 of those being original titles. Doing the same thing for 1993 shows there were 11 games released in that year. None of them are original games, but there were as many individual versions of Simpsons games released in 1993 as there were in 1992. There were plenty of games released in 1993, just no brand new titles. Despite this, it is still a bit odd to go from so many new games to none at all, but there's a few explanations for why this happened. The first is what I've just described. Acclaim was getting through their backlog of porting all the new games from 1992 across to the other systems, so they had studios focused on these ports. The second reason is that Konami stopped developing and publishing Simpsons games. They would return later down the road, but Konami moved on for the time being, leaving only Acclaim making games for the franchise. The last possible reason for why there were no new games in 1993 is that Imagineering was no longer churning out 8-bit Simpsons games. They made 5 new Simpsons games for the NES and Game Boy, and Acclaim no longer had them to keep up that insane release schedule and help ensure that there was always a new Simpsons games out. All of these reasons put together meant that Simpsons fans had to wait for over a year for a new game, with that new game being Bart and the Beanstalk for the Game Boy. Bart and the Beanstalk released in February 1994, but there's reasons to believe that it was supposed to come out in 1993. The first reason is that the copyright year is listed as 1993 on the artwork for the game. This is something that can happen when a game is supposed to get released in one year, all the copies get made, but then for whatever reason it gets delayed, so it was meant to come out in 1993, got delayed, and it would have been too expensive to reprint the game and get rid of all the old copies. The second reason is that in the January 1994 edition of the Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine, it listed the release month as being December 1993. In the February 1994 edition of GamePro magazine, they listed the release month as January. Ultimately, it came out in February, going by when the game entered the sales charts, but 2 different magazines listed release months earlier than the final release, implying that there was a last-minute delay to the release date. My final reason for why it likely was meant to be released in 1993 is that for the last 2 years, Acclaim released new exclusive games for the Game Boy ahead of Christmas. It was Escape from Camp Deadly in 1991, then Bart vs. the Juggernauts in 1992. Itchy and Scratchy and Miniature Golf Madness on the Game Boy would release in November 1994 for that Christmas, so it would make sense that Bart and the Beanstalk would be the Game Boy game for Christmas 1993. There seems to be some type of last minute delay, so that didn't end up happening and it came out in February 1994 instead. With Imagineering gone, we have Software Creations stepping in for Bart and the Beanstalk. Software Creations might as well be Imagineering, or Distinctive Software, or Sculptured Software. They fit right in with the other developers we've seen so far. They started in the 80s and worked on lots of ports and lots of licensed games. They didn't get many chances to make their own games, with the majority of the games they developed being licensed games. They never had that big hit. Their most known and well-liked game might be Plonk for the SNES. It's either that or Solstice, the quest for the Staff of Demonos on the NES. As you might be able to tell, the history of the games they developed is quite bleak. Still, it's nice to see someone else stepping in to develop new Simpsons games. I'm happy to give a new developer a chance. Bart and the Beanstalk is another forgotten Simpsons game. Starting with Bartman meets Radioactive Man, we've entered an era of Simpsons games that people generally don't seem to care that much about. A lost second wave of Acclaim games. Forgotten doesn't mean bad though, so let's give Bart and the Beanstalk a shot and see what Software Creations was able to do with the franchise. The game kicks off with the title screen, showing Bart as Jack from Jack and the Beanstalk holding a sack of money in an old peasant costume. Pressing start kicks off the opening cutscene, which is presented like a storybook. We get a retelling of Jack and the Beanstalk, with Bart filling in for Jack, Homer as Jack's father, and Mr. Burns as Monty the Miser, who sells Bart the magic beans. I'm not going to explain the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. There's not much different here apart from changing details to tie it more to The Simpsons, like Bart has to sell the cow because they ran out of donuts. I can't go any further with this video without first addressing the elephant in the room. Having a game based on a Jack and Beanstalk parody featuring The Simpsons is nonsense and feels completely uninspired. References and parody has been a part of The Simpsons since the early seasons. You didn't get that many full episodes being parodies, but the writers inserted lots of references to other media and one-off jokes directly copying something else. These weren't inserted for their own sake. You can tell the writers were passionate about what they were referencing, and they were, most importantly, usually funny jokes. I didn't get most of the references in the show when I was younger, especially as I'm not American, but I still enjoyed the weird out-of-place moments. In later years, The Simpsons became a more soulless vehicle for parody. If a franchise or a famous story exists, The Simpsons could then be jammed into it. Doesn't make for good humour, but that's where The Simpsons as part of popular culture has ended up, sadly. Nowadays, the idea of Simpsons doing a Jack and the Beanstalk parody isn't that strange. They've done fairy tales in the show already, and The Simpsons have been inserted in so many situations and stories over the years. Putting them in Jack and the Beanstalk is another parody to throw on the pile. There's two problems with this idea for Bart and the Beanstalk. One is just because The Simpsons can be inserted into everything now, doesn't mean it's good. There needs to be a point to the parody, a good idea, funny jokes, or at least some passion behind the idea to make it worthwhile. There's not really much of that here. It's not awful with the storybook presentation and the images they use to show the story, but it doesn't do enough to justify it existing. The second problem is that when Bart and the Beanstalk released, we were still in the golden age of the show. February 1994 was right in the middle of season 5. A lot of classic episodes had been released, and there were a lot more great episodes to come. There wasn't that copy and paste The Simpsons into anything and everything approach yet. It was more comedy focused with the wackier plot, and definitely was moving away from being a more traditional family sitcom. It hadn't crossed that soulless line yet, so when you compare season 4 and 5 to Bart and the Beanstalk stands out as being something lesser that doesn't connect to the show. It's taking a public domain property and famous children's story and throwing The Simpsons in it. You can see where this idea might have come from. The Simpsons is a family show that kids watched, and Jack and the Beanstalk is a kid's story, so if you wanted to make a Simpsons game for children, this would be one way to do it. It feels like there are so many ideas for Simpsons games that you could have done first before this though. Previous Simpsons games didn't necessarily have original ideas, but they mostly tried to stick to the show. Bart and the Beanstalk feels so disconnected from it, it feels like there should have been 10 other games before developers were considering ideas like this. It's not an offensively bad idea, but one that is always going to make the game feel less worthwhile, something not worth checking out or remembering because it's such an uninteresting and needless concept. The quality of the game matters less because there's so little appeal to playing Jack and the Beanstalk with Simpsons characters. I think they tried to approach The Simpsons in the same way as you would with Mickey Mouse, Looney Tunes and Woody Woodpecker, who would frequently parody fairy tales. If those famous cartoon characters could be added into famous stories, then why not Bart, who was the biggest animated character at the time? The difference is that The Simpsons was a very different type of cartoon, so inserting these characters like this feels off. It all comes across as a weak idea and a potentially lazy one as well, and is likely the main reason that this is one of the more forgotten Simpsons games. We're still in the early 90s with Simpsons games, so of course Bart and the Beanstalk is another side-scrolling platformer. The D-pad moves, A jumps, and B fires Bart's trusty slingshot. It's not an Imagineering game, so the general feel is quite different. Bart can't run, but the standard walk speed is decently quick, and there's no slow acceleration, so you can get around easily. The jump is nice and big. You can launch Bart into the air, although you can't control your jump height with quicker A presses. Bart jumps a decent distance left to right when jumping, although sometimes not quite as far as you would like. Bart has a bit of a slipperiness to him. There's a slight slide he does when you try and start moving. It's more loose overall than other Simpsons games without feeling too floaty. It's better than the heaviness we saw in the Imagineering games. It feels okay, it's not too bad moving Bart around. It controls decently enough, but you're going to have a tricky time with this game at first because of the enemies and level design. As you can see, Bart is pretty big on the screen. He's bigger than your typical character in a platformer. The camera tries to keep Bart in the center of the screen, so he takes up even more of the screen as he can never be too far to the left or the right. It's a Game Boy game, so developers have to make a choice. You either shrink the character down to give you more screen space, or you increase the size of the character to make them easier to see and give them more detail. Bart and the Beanstalk went with a bigger character model, and it comes with the usual issues of not being able to see what's in front of you, and either having to make blind jumps or getting hit by enemies you couldn't see coming. It's a common problem on the Game Boy, but you can design around this. To explain how, let's jump back to Escape from Camp Deadly for a bit. Escape from Camp Deadly sometimes had problems with not enough screen space, but it made some smart choices to reduce the extent of the issues. First of all, they didn't have Bart in the middle of the screen. Bart was at the bottom of the screen most of the time, and the camera didn't always try and keep him directly in the middle. Also, because the game was linear, going left to right, it meant the camera could stay still when Bart went backwards a bit, as you were always going to need to move forward at some point, and you would always need to see what's coming up in front of you. These two things allows for more space between Bart and any upcoming enemies and obstacles that come from off screen. The next design choice is the level design itself. They never make you jump onto a platform that you can't see. The camera either scrolls so you can see it, or you're not forced to make a jump. This sounds very basic, like it's an obvious thing to do, but it's surprising how many games mess this up and design levels that don't fit around their camera systems. Escape from Camp Deadly either has levels that go left to right without much going up and down, or dedicated sections where you have to climb up and down. By doing this, it means you can always see what's up ahead. You never have to jump to the side and down. It's one or the other, so platforms are always in view. The last design choice they made to help is with the enemies. The enemies can still feel cheap in this game, but they keep the fast spawning enemies to specific parts of the level, which means once you see one, you can brace yourself as you know more will be spawning in. The enemies also die in one hit. An enemy appears, you decide to dodge or attack, and if you attack, they die in one. If an enemy does catch you out, you can kill them quickly and move on to the next one. I'm not saying Escape from Camp Deadly is a masterclass in game design for the Game Boy, but there were considerations and steps taken to reduce the frustration of playing as a large sprite on a small screen. Some of what I've talked about here you can also see in other games like Super Mario Land 2, which executed these ideas better for the most part. Like, you have much more control over Mario in the air, and the enemies tended to move quite slowly so you have a chance to avoid them when they appear. Going back to Bart and the Beanstalk, that game has better controls than Escape from Camp Deadly, but it doesn't make these similar considerations. This first level puts you in situations where you can't see where you need to jump to. With this being a vertical level where you're climbing up the Beanstalk, if you fall too far downwards, you go off screen and that kills you. First time playing this level where you're figuring out where to go, this is quite easy to do. The enemies in the level act more like obstacles that move. They have fixed movement patterns and don't react to Bart. They have no attacks and they only do damage when you touch them. They can be quite big on screen as well, and you don't get much time to react to them. You have to hit them twice to kill each enemy, and by the time they appear on screen, there's a good chance you've walked into them, so have taken damage, and by the time you hit them twice with the slingshot, they can easily hit you again. They are placed in awkward locations. The level design doesn't give you a chance to see them and then react. They appear at the worst times, like here where you have to climb up these vines, but you have an enemy taking up so much space above, it's hard not to take some damage. The level design doesn't give enough of a chance for new players to react to it. The level isn't all that hard, but if you don't go slowly and play the level with extreme caution at first, it will eat away at your health and you'll die. The game gives you 3 lives, and I lost them all in the first level and got a game over. I've played enough Simpsons platformers to say I'm at least okay at platforming games, but I didn't expect to get a game over so quickly in a game like Bart and the Beanstalk. It's a concept clearly meant to appeal to young children, so even if it gets difficult in later levels, I would have hoped that the first level is nice and easy to ease kids into the game. They didn't take that approach, so add Bart and the Beanstalk as another Simpsons game that leaves a bad first impression. Figuring out the first level, which is appropriately called the Beanstalk, isn't too hard. It takes a bit more memorization than expected, knowing the correct route up the Beanstalk, and knowing where the enemies are so you can spawn them in and take them out without standing in their way. There's a good amount of variety with this level. You're climbing upwards, and you can do that with standard platforming, climbing up vines, bouncing on leaves to shoot upwards, and there's a few different types of bugs to deal with. It looks quite nice as well. The graphics look clean, so everything is clear, while still adding details to certain areas like the big vines and the bugs. If this level was a bit more forgiving and more considerate of the screen size and the fact that it's the first level, it would be a decently strong start to the game. At the top of the Beanstalk you come across the first boss called Antzilla. It's a weird ant creature with this unsettling Simpsons face stuck to it. This type of creature design kinda shows how the Simpsons and fairy tales don't necessarily mix together. The boss itself is as basic as you can get. It goes to one vine to another, and all you have to do is avoid it and attack it with your slingshot. Antzilla never attacks you and can only do damage if you touch it. The boss is a bit tricky at first, because it requires a decent amount of discipline when it comes to the hitboxes and your slingshot. The bottom half of the screen is taken up by the ground below where you're standing on, reducing the size of the arena, and both you and Antzilla are quite big. There's enough room to avoid the boss, but you can't be careless. The slingshot has a delay when you fire it, and can only be fired one shot at a time. It's easy to miss, and you have to account for the delay while making sure you have enough time to avoid the boss after landing a hit. The boss isn't too bad. It helps to teach you about dodging enemies, timing your jumps, and how to successfully use the slingshot. As the first boss of the game, it does its job. It requires you to get a good sense of the controls and needs some thought, but not too much to block progress early on. Beating Antzilla gives us another storybook screen, explaining how Bart could see this giant castle in the clouds, leading into level 2, the Street of Clouds. The Street of Clouds is a more linear level, switching from a vertical climb to going from left to right to get to the end. It's mostly one big bottomless pit, where you jump on different types of cloud platforms and avoid lightning and missiles. This level has a rough start. I died on the first jump twice in a row and got a game over when I first got to this level. The reason I died was because of the cloud platforms that move from side to side. Usually when there are moving platforms in a game, you jump onto a platform and your character is carried by the platform. Once you land on it, you stay on the platform and go side to side until you move to get off. In Bart and the Beanstalk, Bart doesn't get carried by the cloud platform. If you start moving, you stay in place and fall, so you have to move with the platform or jump off it to survive. Bart being a bit slippery when landing doesn't help either. It's normally not a problem, but when you're trying to adjust after landing, the fact you slide a bit means you may overcompensate for that and fall. The first cloud platform in the level also goes off screen when you jump. You need to aim for where the cloud will be after a jump without being able to track it the whole time when in the air. There is no height variation when jumping, so you can't do a small jump to hop onto the platform quickly. After a few tries, this is perfectly doable, and using the cloud platforms is okay in this level, but it goes against some of the instincts you may have. It feels too nerve-wracking and precarious to be shuffling on a moving cloud for what should be a simple platforming challenge. This level is where I figured out what the magic coins were for. Each level has these coins scattered all over them that you can collect. They have two main purposes. The first is that you need to collect enough of them before getting to the end of the level in order to beat the level. In the Beanstalk level, you have to collect 40 as you climb, and if you don't have enough, the boss won't spawn, and you have to go back and collect more. These type of systems don't always work well in games like these. There are too many platformers out there with open-ended level design with a strict amount of items you need to collect, so you end up getting stuck and going around in circles just trying to find that last item. It works well here though. There's always more coins than you need, so it encourages a bit of extra exploration without negatively slowing you down. The second purpose of the coins is that they restore your health. If you collect 3 coins in one jump, then Bart gets some of his health back. If you collect 4 in one jump, then you become invincible for a few seconds. It's a nice little idea. You can imagine there being coins set up in certain ways which create these mini challenges where your jumping skills are rewarded by giving you health. This system isn't implemented that well. In level 1, it's surprisingly difficult to get 3 coins in one jump. You can do it, but there are no freebies where you can easily get some health. I ended up not getting any health refills when first playing the game, which directly resulted in some of the deaths I got in the first level. In contrast, level 2, which has very few enemies, has lots of chains of coins where you can get health without even trying to, due to the way the coins are placed. They give you multiple chains of coins in a row, even though you can't take damage between some of the sets of coins. It feels backwards. It's harder to get health in the first level where you need it more and should be the easiest of the two levels. Level 1 should teach the player about this feature, with future levels presenting more complicated coin patterns, which are harder to increase the difficulty. They didn't do something like this strangely, so it's a neat little idea with these coins, but it doesn't pan out. The Street of Clouds is quite a short level. It is just platforming on the clouds going left to right, with a couple of chances to grab items with slight detours. At the end of the level is another boss, this time against the Cloud Monster. Just like in the original Jack and the Beanstalk story, Bart has to fight an evil cloud that looks like Mr. Burns. I haven't read Jack and the Beanstalk since I was little, so I'm making some assumptions. Antzilla was creepy with it being a giant ant with a vaguely Simpsons looking face on it, and we've gone weirder with Mr. Burns' head acting as a cloud. We've almost hit that level of weirdness where it's charming. It's so forced that I kinda like it. It once again proves that this game is a bad idea, but at least it's not afraid to be strange. This boss destroyed me when I first played it. It flies around the screen and does a lot of damage if it touches you. This boss is like a harder version of Antzilla. It's still all about avoiding the boss and hitting it with your slingshot, but the cloud monster does more damage, it moves faster, and can also shoot lightning. The trick to this one is memorizing its pattern. It can either be in the top left or top right corner, and will either shoot to the opposite corner and back again, go all the way round the screen edge, or come across the screen shooting lightning. It goes through the same pattern every time, and that pattern loops so you can memorize what's going on and react accordingly. Something unexpected happened when fighting this boss. I started having fun. When I first started playing this game, the premise felt so pointless. The level design didn't properly account for the screen size of the Game Boy, and then to have to go for a cloud level where you can't even move properly on moving platforms, and I was ready to dismiss this game. However, now that I was used to the movement, knew how to get health, had a better sense of the levels and how they work, and was able to figure out the pattern to the Cloud Monster boss, putting that all together to beat the boss felt surprisingly good. It's that type of moment that you can get with some of these older games. At first, old games can be unforgiving and you have no idea what to do, but pushing past those initial obstacles and making progress is what makes them interesting to play. Bart and the Beanstalk certainly isn't the best example of this, but it does tap into that experience. Initially finding something hard, only to learn enough where it becomes much easier is rewarding, even in a basic platformer like this. I'm in danger of overselling this feeling now, but at this stage in the game, I found myself wanting to play more and to see what's next. After beating the Cloud Monster, we get the third storybook segment. Bart has reached the castle and knocks on the door to be greeted by the giant's wife, who's played by Marge.
Marge!
These storybook sections are where they try and get some humour into the game. They're telling the story of Jack and the Beanstalk with the Simpsons characters acting like themselves. You mainly see this with Bart, where he's got a bit more attitude than Jack would have when he talks. It's a thumbs up for effort here. Simpsons is a comedy show, so you would expect some jokes in a Simpsons game. I can't say it's that funny though. It would be unfair to have high standards with this game, but Bart vs. the Juggernauts did a much better job with its humour. Bart and the Beanstalk is more forcing some jokes, so they aren't literally just telling the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. Anyway, level 3 is the castle part 1. That's what the manual calls it, although the manual doesn't list a level called Castle Part 2, which is a bit odd. The castle is similar to the Beanstalk level, where you're climbing upwards and going both left to right and right to left to do this. There are mice jumping around, candles that burn in and out, and mouse traps to bounce off. On paper, this is the hardest level so far. The mice move faster than previous enemies, the candles light up at tricky intervals to make them harder to get past, and if you land on the wrong part of the mouse traps, you take damage. The level also starts with a sewing needle falling down that if you don't move straight away, it hits you. On paper it's harder, but it's actually easier than the Beanstalk level. The magic coins are placed in a way where it's quite easy to get health again, so after learning the level layout, I ended up tanking through most of the level. There was no need to avoid everything when there were health pickups and even a golden egg towards the end of the level which makes you invincible for a bit. This level can still kill you easily, as if you fall too far you'll die, and the sewing needles do a lot of damage, but outside of that, you don't need to be that careful. Doesn't make the level bad, more unremarkable. At the end of this section you walk up to a wall to see Bart celebrate for a bit, and then go to the second part of the level, the giant soup. Rather than being a boss this time, we have this platforming challenge, where you have to jump on floating crackers and collect magic coins one by one. Once you have enough coins, you win and beat the level. If you miss a jump and land in the soup, it's an instant kill and you have to start again. The jumps aren't that hard to do. What's unclear and difficult about this level is the perspective. The crackers are placed in an oval, where there's a top layer and a bottom layer. Falling off the bottom layer lands you in the soup, but if you fall from the top layer, you don't drop down to the bottom, you also land in the soup. To drop down from the top layer to the bottom layer, you have to go to the right side and jump on a cracker floating between the two. It's kind of confusing at first, and it's quite harsh that any mistake you make will kill you. Eventually the level swings from being confusing to not actually being that hard after you figure it out, as the coins spawn in a fixed pattern every time, and you can stay on the bottom row for most of it and jump into any coins that spawn higher. I still like the concept of this. It's a different type of boss focusing on platforming in a small area, and jumping on the crackers in a giant bowl of soup is pretty unique. For as odd as the concept is for this game, they certainly go all in on having differently themed levels that all tie into the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. Level 4 is the dungeon, where the gimmick is that you have light and dark parts of the level. You're hidden from the giant in the dark parts, but if you go into the light areas, you take a bit of damage and eventually will get caught by the giant and poked by his big finger. It's another level that's quite linear. You're going to the right and platforming while avoiding mice and fireflies. You have to collect 3 items before you reach the end. A bag of money, a harp with a creepy Lisa head on top of it, and a golden goose. The items are slightly out of your way to get, but very easy to find. You only need to slightly explore to find them. This level also introduces platforms that crumble when you stand on top of them, which took me by complete surprise. When first reaching this level, I jumped on the platform and it disappeared, causing me to fall into a pit, die, and get a game over. There are 6 levels in total in Bart and the Beanstalk, and I got a game over in every single level. A game over sends you back to the start of the game, back to the Beanstalk level to try it again. There was a distinct pattern that emerged during every playthrough of this game. I would get through the levels I had already beaten, completing them quite easily, maybe losing a life, but most of the time beating them first time. Then I would reach a new level that I haven't played before, would lose all my lives on that level and get a game over. I would then start a new playthrough, reach that same level again, and because I understood the gimmicks and level layout, be able to beat it easily without too much trouble. This is quite typical progression for a game like this, where a game over starts you back at the beginning. Each playthrough you get better at the game and learn more about it, which helps you progress further. I mention this though because it's surprising how strict this system feels here. It feels near impossible to beat a level on your first try. It's something I never did. Each level has instant kill elements that will burn through your lives, and because every level has their own gimmick, you have to learn how that works, and you will lose lives as you're figuring that out. Once you do learn a level, it then swings to be kind of easy and it doesn't feel quite right. I would like to at least feel like I could beat a level in 3 lives on my first go. Running into beginner's traps to get a game over in every new level, only to then return to the level and easily avoid those traps to then beat it, it isn't quite as satisfying. It doesn't help that there are no ways to earn lives in this game. There's a scoring system, but that doesn't mean anything, and there's no lives hidden in levels to find. I would have appreciated at least a couple of extra lives to pick up. Reward the players that explore levels with more chances to figure out future ones. The dungeon is another level that you can tank damage to get to the end. You don't need to avoid enemies as they do little damage. There are areas with bottomless pits, but the platforms are pretty big, so as long as you don't dawdle, it's fine. The only hard part is staying out of the light. You have to run into the light at times, and you don't always get a lot of time to get back into the dark. There's no boss at the end of this level either. You reach the end and get a storybook section about the giant now waking up angry because Bart is stealing his gold harp and golden goose. This leads into level 5, the chase. This level is an auto-scroller, where you're going through the Street of Clouds level only backwards as you're fleeing the giant. If you touch the right side of the screen, that counts as you being caught by the giant and you lose a life. The idea of the chase is interesting. You're now actually escaping the castle and fleeing back the way you came, but they added a new gimmick with the auto-scrolling so it has a different feel. Actually playing this level though is rough. Bart was already quite big on the screen, so making one side of the screen an instant death pit that scrolls towards you feels unfair. The jumps you have to make are overly strict. There's moving cloud platforms again, and you have to wait until the last moment before the right of the screen reaches you to make these jumps. It's too stressful and annoying for this to be fun. It's difficult, but the platforming is awkward and the hitbox on the right side of the screen is unclear. It's the worst level in the game. You can die at any point either due to the giant or falling off a platform, and that takes you back to the very start. There's no checkpoints. It's another one that you burn through your lives when you first get here. The moving clouds are just too much of a pain to jump onto and then jump off again. The one positive though is that Bart and the Beanstalk is generous with his platform collision. You won't find yourself falling through any platforms here. If it looks like you can barely make a jump, you almost always make it, which is what makes this level doable. I got most of my game overs on this level, which did start to wear me down a bit, as I had to play the previous 4 levels just to get another chance at this level, which is a level I didn't really like. I did manage to get a sense of it though, and after making it to the end, we have the final level of the game, back to the Beanstalk. Similar to the previous level, it takes an existing level, the Beanstalk, and remixes it by having Bart floating down using a parachute. I really do like that the last 2 levels of the game are remixes of the first 2. There's a real sense of completeness doing this, tying the story together by having Bart climbing the Beanstalk and then quickly climbing back down again. Just like with the chase, I don't actually like the level itself. There's a string of coins to follow showing you the path down, but if you follow the path, you take damage from these new bird enemies. There's so little room for you to avoid the birds. Bart and the birds are both too big. The birds do so much damage that you can't hit too many of them, and the coins stop healing you for this level, so you can't get any health back. You also have to be quick. If you hit the top of the screen, that counts as the giant catching you. The parachute doesn't control too badly. You can go side to side, and you can slow yourself down by holding up. It feels pretty good. I just wish the birds weren't put in the worst positions possible. I did figure out how to avoid them. You have to hold up and go to the side as early as you can. It didn't feel right though. I know it's the last level, but the enemy placement didn't need to be this harsh. After another game over and playing back up to this level, I was able to dodge the birds, and the level ends with Bart landing on the ground. You grab the axe, triggering the last storybook section, explaining Bart chopping down the Beanstalk to kill the giant. There's an image showing Bart standing on a dead Homer giant, and the game explains that the family were able to sell off the items Bart stole to buy more donuts, leading to the end screen. The credits roll, ending off Bart and the Beanstalk. This game ends up being pretty short. My successful playthrough took 18 minutes in total. There's only 6 levels, each being a few minutes long once you know how to beat them. I didn't feel too shortchanged though. It took me 14 attempts to beat Bart and the Beanstalk, and I spent over 3 hours playing it. That's not too bad in my opinion. I don't need a Game Boy platformer to be a massive game. There's a place in gaming for a short, to-the-point game like this. Just like Escape from Camp Deadly, you can pick it up, see how far you get, and then put it down again. It works in short bursts and it has a decent sense of progression, so it comes together in the end, even if there isn't much content. So that's Bart and the Beanstalk. We have a platformer that was more competent than I was expecting. It controls decently, each level has its own gimmicks providing variety with the platforming across the game, and overall it works. Saying the game works is a low bar, but sadly that's where we're at with Simpsons video games. It's a typical Game Boy platformer that doesn't have anything that unique, but what it does well enough that it's a decent time trying to beat this game. There's flaws such as the level design doesn't properly accommodate for the size of the Game Boy screen, and the first impression isn't that great due to the first level, but neither of these aspects do enough to make it bad. It's perfectly playable, with some sense of satisfaction getting further into the game each time and finally putting that all together to beat it. It can be fun on occasion. it can also be frustrating, like with the moving clouds and the beginner traps in each levels, but nothing feels like a true difficulty spike. I think the game is alright. It doesn't particularly stand out as being good or bad as something on the Game Boy, if you're willing to take the time to get a feel for the controls and level design. It's something that a kid with a Game Boy could enjoy, if only for a short time. Saying all this, when looking at other platformers on the Game Boy, you can see how Bart and the Beanstalk was still quite dated. The Game Boy launched with Super Mario Land, and Super Mario Land 2 released back in 1992. By the time you get to 1994, Game Boy games were improving and getting better at replicating console games and working within the limitations of the Game Boy. 1994 would see the release of Donkey Kong, but even before then you had Wario Land, which released at the same time as Bart and the Beanstalk, but it was much more impressive in terms of scope and ambition. Even a game like Mr. Nuts, which also released in 1994, was ahead of this game. It has this nice world map screen, the graphics are more detailed, with the characters being a more sensible size, and there's a password system to continue progress. When you compare what was being released at the time to Bart and the Beanstalk, it's obvious that it was behind its competitors, like the other Simpsons games we've looked at before. Just compare the cutscenes in Aladdin on the Game Boy to Bart and the Beanstalk, and the quality difference is obvious. Putting its competitors to a side for 1 second, there's still some fun to be had with this game, but it's something that feels like it should have been released 2 years earlier. For ranking Bart and the Beanstalk, I can say that as a platformer, this beats all the NES Imagineering games. It's a simple game that functions much better. As a video game, it goes right alongside Escape from Camp Deadly and Bartman Meets Radioactive Man, as it's an okay platformer. However, this is all about ranking Simpsons video games, and I need to consider its worth to a Simpsons fan when it comes to ranking it. The idea of a game based on Jack and the Beanstalk feels so pointless that it makes the whole game feel pointless. Even though it's an okay platformer, the premise of the game never feels justified, and it's a hard one to recommend. Outside of some decent looking images of the Simpsons characters as characters from Jack and the Beanstalk, there's no reason for this to exist. If you're really curious about it, I can at least say that it's a much better platformer than other Simpsons games, but that's it. Bart vs. the Space Mutants is a more interesting Simpsons game, with it being the first Simpsons game and it actually taking place in Springfield. Bart vs. the World is a more interesting Simpsons game, with its opening cutscene, Bart riding a skateboard on the Great Wall of China, and the Simpsons trivia questions. This pushes Bart and the Beanstalk down the list, when considering both how good of a game it is and whether it's actually worthwhile for a Simpsons fan to check out. Ultimately, I'm going to rank it at number 20, below Bart's House of Weirdness and above Bart vs. the Juggernauts. House of Weirdness goes higher than Bart and the Beanstalk because of how much of the Simpsons injected into it. And even though the same could be said about Bart vs. the Juggernauts, I had a really bad time playing that game, to the point where Bart and the Beanstalk being okay means I prefer it in the end. I would still recommend Bart and the Beanstalk over Bart vs. the Juggernauts due to general playability. Playing Bart and the Beanstalk has made me think about how much the concept of a game matters in terms of its worth. Bart's Nightmares premise and ideas pushed it quite high on the list, and while Krusty's Funhouse is a pretty poor idea for a Simpsons game, the gameplay did enough to elevate it. These Simpsons games are all a mix of how fun they are to play and how much they represent the show, and that balance is manifested in different ways. In another world, Escape from Camp Deadly and Bartman Meets Radioactive Man would be towards the bottom of the list, but when so many games have obvious flaws with their controls and level design, it makes ranking these games a bit more difficult. Bart's Nightmare, Bart vs. the Space Mutants and Bart's House of Weirdness are some of the best ideas for Simpsons games, and if we were ranking these on ideas alone, they would all be at the top. Bart and the Beanstalk is towards the bottom with its concept. Being a middle of the road Game Boy platformer stopped it from going too low, but it wasn't good enough to save it. It's on the same level as Escape from Camp Deadly as a game, but we're at the stage now where the ideas are starting to run dry. The appeal simply isn't there to make it worth checking out, meaning you end up with something that, while it isn't awful, it sadly doesn't do enough to make it worth remembering. And that's Bart and the Beanstalk added to the list. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this look at Bart and the Beanstalk, please consider giving this video a like or leaving a comment below. I'll see you next time for Virtual Bart, a direct sequel to Bart's Nightmare, one of the better Simpsons game, with a chance to smooth out the gameplay problems that game had? What could possibly go wrong?